The diagnostic screen blinked 3 times before it decided to stay on. Yara Osai noted this in the ship's log. Entry 2209. The primary display was showing signs of decay in the lower left quadrant, which meant she had maybe 18 months before that section went dark for good. She added it to the repair list. The repair list was 4 pages long. She had stopped feeling bad about that somewhere around year 3. She refilled her mug from the condensate collector above the water recycler. The mug had a crack running from the handle stub. The handle itself had broken off in year 7 to the base. She had sealed it with polymer resin twice. It held. The Lagos skyline printed on its side had faded from blue to the color of very old sky. She drank from it anyway. It did not taste like coffee. It tasted like recycled water with ambition. She drank it every morning and did not think too hard about the difference. The Okonkwo drifted. That was what it had done for 31 years. Drifted, in the technical sense, meaning Yara kept the engines at minimum output and the ship's profile as cold and dark as she could manage. The hull was coated in 3 layers of scatter-absorption material she had stripped from the wreck of a Keth survey drone in year 11. From the outside, the Okonkwo looked like debris, orbital trash, a dead thing turning slowly in the dark between stars. She had worked very hard to make it look that way. The ship was a deep survey vessel. That was what its original designation said. It had been built to map uncharted systems, spend 2 years in deep space, return with data. It had never been built to be a warship, a hideout, a one-woman station, or the last registered human vessel in a galaxy that had decided humanity was finished. But Yara had spent 31 years disagreeing with that decision. She was doing her standard morning check, drive coils, reactor shielding, sensor array. The 6 automated repair drones she had nursed back to functionality over the course of a decade when the beacon hit. It was not aimed at her. Nothing was ever aimed at her. That was the point. It was a wideband broadcast on the standard Keth Dominion frequency, and it was playing an announcement. She caught the first 3 seconds and felt her hand go still on the console. She let it play. The Keth Dominion's Office of Cultural Commemoration was pleased to announce the 30-year anniversary celebration of the resolution of the human conflict. There would be a ceremonial address from the Grand Arbiter. There were monuments being unveiled on 4 Dominion worlds. There was a cultural program of music, historical reflection, and commemorative exhibitions. Citizens of the Dominion were encouraged to mark the occasion with their communities. Resolution of the human conflict. That was what they called it. Yara set down her mug. She listened to all 4 hours of the broadcast. She did not move from the console. She did not eat. She listened to every speech, every musical piece, every carefully worded reflection on the Dominion's great achievement of stability and galactic order. She listened to a Keth historian describe the human species as a cautionary study in what happened when a young civilization failed to understand its place in the wider order of things. She listened to a Keth child choir perform a commemorative song. She could not translate the lyrics, but the melody was cheerful. When it ended, the silence of the ship pressed in around her. She picked up her mug, drank, set it down. Well, there it is. She opened the ship's navigation computer. She had not touched the deep drive controls in 6 years, not since the last time she had surfaced briefly to collect salvage from a debris field at the edge of the Voron system. She pulled up the charts she had spent 31 years building, route calculations, fleet rotation patterns, supply line maps, structural data on Keth Station defenses. She had pulled from encrypted drone signals using a decryption algorithm she had written herself over the course of 2 years, because she had nothing else to do and nowhere else to be. The galaxy thought she was dead. She had been very careful about that. It had also made her extremely productive. She started the drive warm-up sequence. The Okonkwo shuddered slightly, the way it always did, the way any 31-year-old ship held together with salvage and stubbornness would shudder when asked to wake up. She ran the pre-launch check. She topped off her mug one more time. Her hands were steady. She had expected them not to be. She had wondered in the long, dark years whether the moment she finally decided to move would break something in her that the waiting had kept whole. She had wondered if she would cry or freeze or find that she had gone too quiet inside to feel anything at all. Her hands were steady. She thought about a Keth child choir singing a cheerful song about the resolution of the human conflict. She engaged the drive. The Okonkwo came alive. She had given them 30 years to feel something like regret. They had spent it throwing a party instead. Bless their hearts. She set a course for the edge of Keth Dominion space. They had 30 years to build an empire on top of her species' grave. She had 30 years to study every crack in the foundation. The Okonkwo dropped from null space at the boundary marker of Keth Dominion Territory 7, a point in space marked by 3 automated warning buoys that broadcast trespass notices in 11 languages, none of them human, because why would they be? She did not move through the boundary. Not yet. She held position 20,000 kilometers off the nearest buoy and opened a standard hailing frequency. Nothing happened for 4 minutes. Then a voice came back, speaking Keth standard, with the particular tone of someone who had been pulled away from something more interesting. Unregistered vessel, you are transmitting on an outdated frequency format. State your affiliation and registry number. Yara had spent 3 months years ago learning to speak Keth standard well enough to be understood. She was not fluent. She was functional. She had decided that was sufficient. She said in Keth standard, "This is Commander Yara Osai, commanding vessel Okonkwo, registered under the United Earth Remnant Fleet. I am transmitting a request for transit clearance under Article 7 of the Galactic Covenant." The silence after that was longer than 4 minutes. When the voice came back, it had a different quality. Something between confusion and the particular kind of dismissal you gave to things that were wasting your time. Could you repeat your registry affiliation? United Earth Remnant Fleet, Yara said again. Human, species designation, Homo sapiens. I can send the registry file if you need it. She sent it. She watched the sensor display. The patrol ship, a mid-class Keth border cutter, 2 crew, light armament, the kind of vessel they sent to handle debris notifications and minor trespass alerts, had gone very still. Then she heard it. The patrol commander, a male voice she would later learn belonged to an officer named Cole, laughed. Not a surprised laugh, not an uncomfortable laugh, a genuine, full laugh. The kind that came from something being, to him, actually funny. She looked at the registry file still open on her screen. Species, Homo sapiens, 2 words, present tense. She noted the laugh in her log. Entry 2210. Cole composed himself enough to say that he was forwarding her transmission to regional command and that she should hold position. His tone suggested he expected her to vanish back into wherever she had come from once someone more senior told her, gently, that this was not possible. She held position. While she waited, she watched a second signal on her sensor array. Not Keth. A smaller signature, running on a tight beam frequency, parked about 60,000 kilometers off her port side. They had been there since before she dropped from null space. They had not identified themselves. They were just watching. The Varani Compact. She had known they would be watching. She had counted on it. The Varani were a small power, 3 systems, moderate fleet, not wealthy, not aggressive. They had not participated in the resolution of the human conflict. They had not protested it either. They had gone quiet, the way small nations go quiet when larger ones do things that cannot be undone. But they had also spent 30 years filing very precise and very uncomfortable questions through official Galactic Covenant channels about the legal status of surviving human individuals, and they had never stopped filing them, even when everyone ignored them. Yara had picked up their signal traffic years ago. She had read every filing. She had built a picture of them the way she built pictures of everything, carefully, slowly, from fragments. She had decided they were the galaxy's conscience. Stunned and afraid but still present, she had decided that was worth something. Regional Keth Command came back 40 minutes later. The voice belonged to someone with more rank and less patience than Cole. Yara went through it again. Her name, her ship, her species designation, her formal request for transit clearance under Galactic Covenant Article 7. The senior officer told her that Article 7 applied to recognized civilizations with active legal status under the Covenant. He told her, in the polite tone of someone explaining something to an entity that clearly did not understand the situation, that humanity's legal status had been designated as inactive, conflict, resolved 30 years prior. I am filing to have that designation reviewed, Yara said. On what grounds? On the grounds that I exist. Another silence, different from the others. This one had weight to it. Hold your position, the senior officer said. Someone will contact you. She held position for 2 days. During those 2 days, she ran diagnostics. She ate her stored rations. She refilled her mug 11 times. She slept for 4 hours at a stretch twice, which was more than she had managed at once in 6 years. The certainty of motion, she found, was more restful than the long stillness of waiting to move. The Varani Compact's ship did not move either. It just watched. On the second day, it shifted slightly, 10 kilometers closer, still silent. She appreciated the company. She did not say so out loud. On the morning of the third day, she received an official communication from the Keth Dominion Office of Interspecies Affairs. They had reviewed her registry filing. They were prepared to offer her a formal hearing before a panel of the Dominion High Council, as a courtesy to the unusual circumstances of her situation. The tone of the communication was the tone of people who expected the hearing to be brief, administrative, and conclusive. She accepted. She also, while accepting, broadcast a second signal on a different band. Low frequency, very old format, a format the Keth did not monitor because no surviving species still used it. It was a single pulse, no message, just a presence marker. She had been broadcasting that pulse, on that frequency, for 23 years. She had never gotten a response. She broadcast it one more time and set a course for the Keth Dominion's central hub system. They had built their best rooms over the ruins of everything she had ever loved. She had never once been tempted to stop studying the architecture. The council chamber was designed to make visitors feel small. Yara had read the architectural specs for it in a Keth administrative document she had intercepted and decrypted in year 14. The ceiling height was deliberate. The distance from the entrance to the central speaking position was deliberate. The material of the floor, a pale composite that made every footstep sound like an intrusion, was deliberate. The Keth had spent considerable effort designing a room that announced, before anyone opened their mouth, who was important and who was not. She walked to the central speaking position and stood there while 5 council members looked down at her from their elevated seats. They were not hostile, that was almost worse. They were curious. She was an interesting thing, a preserved specimen that had found its way out of its case. The lead counselor, a female the junior staff addressed as Petra, opened the session by nodding, for the record, that this was an unprecedented situation, and that the council was extending this hearing as a professional courtesy. Yara said she appreciated it. Petra asked her to describe her circumstances, how she had survived, where she had been, what she had been doing. Yara described briefly the ship, the drift, the 31 years. The council members exchanged looks. One of them, younger, on Petra's left, leaned toward his neighbor and said something that made the neighbor smile. Yara did not have enough Keth standard to catch it. She noted their expressions instead. She had become very good at reading expressions across species lines. You had a lot of time to study things when you were the only person in the room for 3 decades. Petra asked what Yara wanted. Yara said, I want to file a formal declaration of surviving remnant civilization under Article 11 of the Galactic Covenant. I want my species' legal status reclassified from inactive to active. I want territory and resource rights commensurate with a recognized surviving remnant population. Petra's expression did not change. She was a professional. And your remnant population, Petra said, consists of yourself. Currently represented by myself, Yara said. I did not say I was alone. That landed differently. The young counselor on Petra's left stopped smiling. Petra moved the session forward with the efficiency of someone redirecting a conversation that had become uncomfortable. She asked technical questions about the Okonkwo's registry and legal standing. She asked about Yara's chain of command and what authority remained to grant it. She asked whether Yara had any legal counsel familiar with Galactic Covenant jurisprudence. Yara answered all of it, calmly, specifically, with dates, reference numbers, and Covenant article citations she had memorized over years of reading every relevant legal document she could intercept or reconstruct from public databases. Petra blinked once at the citation precision. She had not expected that. The session broke for what was called a deliberation recess. It was not a deliberation recess. Yara could hear them clearly. The chamber's acoustics, which had been designed to project the voices of the elevated seats downward, also reflected ambient sound from the side rooms back toward the central speaking position. Another detail she had learned from the architectural specs. They were not deliberating. They were describing what they were going to offer her. A nature reserve, a Class M moon in a quiet system at the edge of Dominion space, 12 square kilometers of protected land, a formal gesture of covenant compliance, something they could point to if the Varani Compact kept filing its uncomfortable questions. They thought it was generous. Yara was still thinking about that when the Varani Compact's representative entered the chamber. Her name was Nina. She was young for a diplomat, early 30s by the look of her, with the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible in rooms where she was not welcome. She had been assigned as a neutral observer for the hearing, a standard covenant provision Yara had specifically requested, and which the Keth had agreed to without reading the implications carefully enough. Nina walked to the observer's position on the far side of the room. She set her documentation case on the table in front of her. She did not look at Yara. Her left hand, flat on the table as she arranged her materials, slid a data chip across the surface. 2 centimeters, barely a movement. The chip came to rest at the table's edge, close enough to the central speaking position that Yara, standing there, could reach it without moving her feet. Yara picked it up. She did not look at Nina. Nina did not look at her. The council members returned. Petra announced the council's offer. The nature reserve. The 12 square kilometers. The formal gesture of good faith toward the memory of a species the Dominion had, as Petra carefully phrased it, been forced into conflict with through deeply regrettable historical circumstances. Yara held the data chip in her closed hand. Then Petra said it. She was listing the historical context, establishing the record, laying out the Dominion's official position on the events of 31 years ago. Her language was bureaucratic, thorough, and almost entirely bloodless. And in the middle of it, describing the campaign that had ended with the destruction of every major human world, she used the phrase, a necessary stabilizing event. She said it the way you said things that were simply true, not cruelly, without any particular feeling at all. Yara's hands were flat on the table. She counted the seconds. The table was cold. Federationale composite, cold against her palms. She counted the cold. She thought about a cracked mug with a faded city on it. She thought about recycled water that did not taste like coffee, but that she drank anyway every morning, because some habits were not about the taste. She said, I declined the offer. Petra looked at her with the expression of someone who had not considered this a variable. I am filing a counter-declaration, Yara said. Under Article 14 of the Galactic Covenant, which covers the legal obligations of covenant signatories toward civilizations whose status was altered by direct military action, without a formal declaration of war, a finding of legal aggression, or a covenant-sanctioned vote of intervention. Nina, at the observer's table, was looking at her documentation, very carefully looking at her documentation. "I am also requesting," Yara said, "that the current session be entered into the official covenant record as a legal proceeding, with all statements made here treated as formal testimony." The young counselor on Petra's left had stopped smiling for good. Petra said, with remarkable composure, that the council would need time to review this filing. Yara said she understood completely. She noted that the review period under Article 14 had a mandatory maximum of 30 standard days, and that during this period, the filing party had the legal right to remain in Dominion territory without interference. 31 years of reading every document she could get her hands on. She had always figured it would come in useful eventually. Here is the thing about being underestimated for long enough. You stop being insulted by it. You start being grateful. Every year they did not look for her was a year they handed her freely. She had 31 years of free education, paid for by their certainty that she was already dead. She walked out of the chamber with the data chip in her pocket and their future in her hands, and she did not look back. The 3 Keth warships came out of null space, in a formation that would have been impressive if she had not been expecting them. She had been expecting them since she left the council chamber. The Okonkwo was parked in a holding orbit above the Keth hub system's outer beacon ring, exactly where the Dominion's traffic authority had assigned her, exactly within the legal boundaries of her Article 14 filing, exactly in a position that a quick sensor sweep would tell you was tactically unfavorable and easily contained. That was what she wanted them to think. The 3 warships, a mid-class command vessel flanked by 2 heavier patrol cruisers, established a triangular containment pattern around her. Standard intercept formation. She had seen its design parameters in a Keth tactical manual she had recovered from a derelict in year 19. She had spent 2 weeks memorizing the response timing tables in that manual. The command vessel hailed her on a broad channel. The voice that came through belonged to someone who introduced himself as Fleet Captain Cole. He spoke crisply and without hostility, which was how you spoke when you expected compliance. He told her that the Okonkwo was being impounded, pending a review of its registry documentation and the legal validity of its Article 14 filing. He told her this was a routine procedural measure. He told her that resistance would be both inadvisable and unnecessary. Yara looked at the Lagos mug on the console. She did not pick it up, she just looked at it. She said, "I acknowledge your communication, Captain Cole. I would like to note for the record, and for the Covenant monitoring frequency I am currently broadcasting on, that this impoundment is occurring within the 30-day review period specified under Article 14, which prohibits interference with the filing party." Cole paused for 3 seconds. He had not expected the Covenant monitoring frequency. "That notation is recorded," he said. "Our legal team has determined that impoundment of a vessel with disputed registry status does not constitute interference under Article 14. Your legal team is welcome to make that argument," Yara said. "I look forward to the case." Cole told her she had 10 minutes to power down her systems and prepare for docking. She said she understood. She did not power down. What she did in those 10 minutes was open a set of secondary systems that the Okonkwo did not have listed in any registry document, because she had built them herself over the course of a decade and never told anyone. The Okonkwo was not a warship. This was true. But it was also true that she had spent 31 years in the debris fields of every major engagement in the sector, and that the Keth military, like all large militaries, assumed its destroyed hardware was destroyed and stopped tracking it. They cataloged their losses for budget purposes. They did not imagine anyone was salvaging weapon systems from their wrecks, and reverse engineering them into a 30-year-old survey vessel. Why would they? There was no one left to do that. She brought up the navigational mirror array first. 14 emitter nodes distributed across the hull, each one capable of rebroadcasting a sensor return as if it were originating from a different position. She had spent 4 years building it and 9 months calibrating it. It did not make her invisible. It made her location a question. She brought up the drive modulation system second. It could replicate the drive signature of 11 different Keth vessel classes. She had the signature for the exact model of mid-class command vessel currently occupied by Captain Cole. She brought up the third system last. It was the one she was proudest of. She had no proper name for it. She thought of it as the library. It was a program that could access and broadcast any Keth operational signal she had collected over 31 years, which was, by this point, a fairly comprehensive archive. Cole's 10 minutes ran out. He told her she was now in violation of a direct order from Keth Dominion Fleet Command. She said, "Captain Cole, I want to make sure I understand the situation correctly. You are ordering the impoundment of a vessel that has filed a legal action against the Keth Dominion during the protected review period of that filing in a system that is currently broadcasting on the Galactic Covenant monitoring frequency. Is that an accurate summary?" "Power down your systems," Cole said. "I am simply clarifying the record," Yara said. One of the flanking cruisers moved. It came forward 20 kilometers and went to active weapons lock. She felt the targeting signal hit her hull sensors like a door being pushed open. She did not power down. She activated the navigational mirror array. What Cole's sensors showed him in the next 4 seconds was that the Okonkwo had somehow jumped to 3 positions simultaneously. This was not physically possible. His sensors knew it was not possible. They showed it anyway, because physics is reliable but calibration data is only as accurate as the signals feeding it, and she was feeding his instruments 31 years of patient engineering. While Cole was processing this, she activated the drive modulation system. The command vessel's own sensor array began reading a drive signature identical to its own, coming from the port side of the rightmost cruiser. Friendly Fire Protocol was an automatic system in Keth fleet design. She had read that in the technical manual, multiple times. The cruiser began evasive maneuvering away from what its computers were telling it was an unscheduled vessel in its immediate flight path. This brought it directly into the path of the second cruiser. She did not fire a single weapon. She did not need to. She just let their own systems, their own protocols, their own automatic responses do the work that 31 years of study had prepared her to guide. Cole was shouting at his crew. She could hear it on the open channel. She activated the library. What came out of her communications array was a Priority 1 Fleet emergency broadcast. Keth signal, Keth encryption, Keth authentication codes she had pulled from an intercepted command drone in year 24, announcing a navigation emergency in the sector and requesting all vessels hold position pending traffic authority clearance. Cole's formation froze. Not long, 30 seconds, maybe 40, before someone at Fleet Command figured out the signal was false. But that was enough. She had already done the thing that mattered. While Cole's formation was locked in its own confusion, she transmitted the contents of the data chip Nina had given her. She did not send it to Cole. She did not send it to the Keth Dominion. She sent it to every independent news relay in the sector, every non-aligned Covenant monitoring station, and the Varani Compact's public information network, where it would be received by a diplomat named Nina who had been waiting 30 years to file it somewhere it could not be buried. The chip contained documentation, 30 years of Varani Compact records, survey data, intercepted communications, testimony from 14 species who had witnessed events they had not reported at the time, because reporting them had seemed like a reliable way to become the next item on the Dominion's agenda. The documentation covered, in precise legal detail, every aspect of what the Keth called the resolution of the human conflict. It used different language. Cole's weapons lock came back online. His formation was re-establishing. He had 45 seconds of real tactical advantage of position, firepower, numbers. She was already calculating the mirror array's next sequence, the second drive signature replication, the cascade of false readings she could layer into his targeting systems for the next 6 minutes before the equations tilted definitively in his direction. She did not need more than 6 minutes. The transmission was already gone. Cole told her very quietly now that she needed to stop. "I am not doing anything, Captain," she said. "My systems are operating normally." "What did you transmit?" "Public information," she said. "Available to any Covenant member with an information access filing. Article 22. The weapons lock held for 11 seconds. Then it went off. Cole said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its crispness. It had the quality of someone who had just been told, quietly, by someone off-channel, that the situation had changed in ways that could not be unchanged. "Hold your position," he said. "Of course," she said. She picked up the mug, held it, did not drink. Somewhere in the sector, on a frequency she had been broadcasting for 23 years, in a format the Keth did not bother monitoring, a pulse was still going out. One pulse, no message, just a presence marker. She was thinking about that when the response came. It was faint, encoded, using the same old format because old formats were safe, because they were invisible to the people who had never needed to look for them. One pulse back. Then a second. Then a third. She stared at the sensor array for 4 seconds. Then she opened the channel. The voice that came through was a woman's voice, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, but alive. Her name was Lena. She did not give a last name. She said, "We heard you. We have been hearing you for a long time." Yara had thought about this moment in the abstract for years. She had thought about what she would say. She had thought about whether she would be able to speak at all. She said, "How many?" Lena said, "More than you think." Yara looked at the mug in her hands. She set it down carefully. She said, "Then stay on this channel." The Keth had built their empire assuming the last human would do the sensible thing and disappear. She had never been accused of being sensible, not once in her life. The emergency session of the Keth Dominion High Council was called without public announcement. Yara was not invited. She found out about it anyway, because Captain Cole's command ship was still within range of her sensor array, and the secure communication protocols used by Keth flag rank officers had an encryption weakness she had identified in year 27 and had been waiting to use at precisely the right moment. She listened to the session through Cole's communications array, parked in her chair with her mug and her patience, while the most powerful governing body in the quadrant tried to figure out what to do about her. It was not a smooth session. 3 allied powers had already sent private communications to the Dominion, questioning their commitments in light of the Varani data release. The monitoring stations had flagged the impoundment attempt for review. 2 Covenant arbitration officers had filed preliminary inquiries, and the Varani Compact had, within 4 hours of the data transmission, issued a formal public statement calling for a full legal review of the events of 31 years ago. Nina, it turned out, had not been waiting 30 years to file one data chip. She had been waiting 30 years to file everything. The chip was a key. Behind it was a door. Behind the door was a building Yara had not known existed, assembled piece by people she had never met, who had watched in quiet distress and documented everything they could not stop. The council session went for 7 hours. Yara ate 2 ration bars and refilled her mug 4 times. At the end of 7 hours, the Grand Arbiter, a senior Keth official whose name she would later learn was Devin, requested a private communication channel with the Okonkwo. She let it sit for 12 seconds before she answered. She had been told once by a negotiation instructor at the Earth Defense Academy that silence was the most powerful tool in any formal exchange. She had forgotten most of what the Academy taught her. She had not forgotten that. Devin's voice was measured. He had the tone of someone accustomed to being the largest presence in any conversation. He was adjusting, carefully and visibly, to the fact that he was not certain of that at this moment. He said, "Commander Osai, we would like to discuss a resolution to the current situation." Yara said, "I am available to discuss that." He asked what she wanted. She took 12 seconds before she answered. She counted them silently. She watched the mug on her console, the cracked ceramic, the faded skyline. Then she told him. Not a nature reserve, not a gesture, not a monument or a cultural designation or a formal expression of historical regret that could be archived and forgotten in a drawer of the Covenant bureaucracy. Coordinates. 12 human habitable worlds. She gave him the survey designations, which she had identified herself over the course of 2 decades of sensor work, and cross-referenced against the Keth's own planetary classification databases, to be transferred under Covenant land grant provisions, with full resource and sovereign rights, to a provisional human governing body operating under Varani Compact Guarantee. A formal reclassification of the events of 31 years ago in the official Covenant historical record, not the Dominion's internal record, the Covenant record, the one that every member species could access, the one that did not allow the phrase stabilizing event. The withdrawal of every Keth cultural archive, public broadcast, and educational material that described the end of the human worlds as a resolution, an outcome, or an achievement of any kind, replaced with the Covenant standard language for what it legally was. And the anniversary broadcasts, pulled, every copy, every archive, every databank and schoolroom and cultural center in the Dominion. Devin was quiet for a long time. He said, "You are describing a restructuring of Dominion public record that would be politically significant." "I would use a different word," Yara said. "What word would you use?" "Accurate," she said. He asked if she had considered a position of moderation, something less formal, less public, less likely to create instability in the Dominion's political structure. She said, "I spent 31 years in the dark being moderate. I am done with moderation." He asked her what the alternative was if they declined. She did not answer immediately. She let him sit with the question, let him calculate. He was a smart man. He had access to the same sensor logs Cole had filed. He knew what the Okonkwo had done to 3 warships without firing a single weapon. He knew what the Varani data release had already cost him in allied commitments. He knew she was broadcasting on a frequency his monitors had never bothered tracking, and that something out there in the dark was responding to it. He was a smart man. She did not need to explain the alternative. She just needed to let him arrive at it himself. He said finally, "I will convene a formal session." She said, "I will be available." The formal session was not quick. It took 11 days. During those 11 days, Yara held position, ran diagnostics, ate her rations, and kept the old format frequency open. The responses kept coming. Lena checked in twice a day, relaying signals from other vessels she had been in contact with through a relay network Yara had not known existed, but that someone, or many someones, had been quietly maintaining. On day 3, a man named Felix transmitted a set of coordinates from the far side of the sector. He had a ship, he said. It was not in great condition. He had been making it work. On day 5, 2 more vessels. A woman named Dara, who had a voice like compressed iron and a ship that sounded, from its drive emissions, significantly better maintained than Yara's own. And a young man who said his name was Cal, who sounded like he had been alone a very long time and was not entirely sure how to talk to people anymore. She understood the feeling. She told him to take his time. By day 9, she had confirmed contact with 31 vessels, 31 ships scattered across the dark, all running cold, all broadcasting on the old frequency because their pilots had learned the same lesson she had learned. Stay invisible. Stay patient. Study the world that replaced you. She had not known about all of them. This fact kept returning to her as she sat in the quiet of the Okonkwo, in a way she had not expected and could not quickly catalog. She had thought she was alone. She had accepted it. She had built her entire plan around the condition of being alone, because planning for anything else felt like something she could not afford to lose if it turned out to be wrong. There had been others, all this time. 31 ships keeping their engines cold, sending a pulse into the dark once a month and listening for an answer that never came. Until now. She did not have a word for what that was. She was not going to go looking for one. On day 11, she received the formal summons to the Covenant Arbitration Chamber. The session was conducted not in the Keth Dominion's council chamber, but in a neutral station in the Varani Compact's outer system, under the authority of 3 Covenant arbitration judges drawn by standard rotation from the non-aligned species registry. Devin arrived with 12 advisors and a legal team. Yara arrived alone. She parked the Okonkwo at the station dock and walked through the station's corridors and into the arbitration chamber, and she stood at the central speaking position, the way she had stood in the Keth Council chamber, and she waited. Nina was present as the Varani Compact's representative. She sat at the observer's table. She looked at Yara once directly before the session opened. She did not smile. She gave a very small nod, the nod of someone who had been patient for a very long time and was watching the patience pay off. Devin opened by stating that the Dominion wished to enter into a formal agreement under the provisions of Galactic Covenant Article 11, covering the rights and status of surviving remnant civilizations, and Article 14, covering obligations arising from military actions conducted without formal legal sanction. He said it clearly, without hedging. The arbitration judges recorded it. Yara watched his face. He was not happy. Happiness was not what she was here for. She was here for the signature and the record, and the 12 sets of planetary coordinates she had identified by herself over 20 years of patient sensor work in the dark between stars. The terms were read into the Covenant record. Her terms, with minor adjustments she had pre-approved through the arbitration process. The 12 worlds, the legal reclassification, the archive revision, the broadcasts pulled. She had not told Devin about the 31 ships. The arbitration record did not require it. The terms applied to the human species as a legal entity. The human species did not need to present its census numbers to have legal rights. That was the entire point of the covenant. He signed. She watched him sign it. She had imagined this moment in different ways over the years. In some versions, it had felt enormous. In some, she had thought she might not be able to stay standing. She had wondered what it would cost her to see it, the way paying for something always costs you whether or not you can afford it. It felt like setting down something very heavy, not putting it down gently, like letting it drop from hands that had been holding it long past the point where holding it was useful and were simply relieved to be empty. She signed the agreement on behalf of the United Earth Remnant Fleet, Commander Yara Osai, last commissioned officer in active service. She kept her face neutral, her hands were steady. After the session, Nina crossed the room to her. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "The data, the full archive. We began compiling it 3 months after the glassing. Every analyst who could be convinced to document rather than look away. It took a long time to build." Yara said, "You kept filing the inquiries, every year." "We kept filing," Nina said. "We did not know what else to do." Yara thought about that. She thought about a small nation going quiet while larger ones did things that could not be undone, but still asking the question every year because silence felt worse than being ignored. She thought about what it meant to be the galaxy's conscience, limited and afraid and persistent and still there. She said it was enough. Nina nodded. Her eyes were bright. She blinked once. Yara said, "Thank you." She walked back to the Okonkwo. She sat down in the pilot's seat. She picked up the mug. Outside, the station's communication array was already carrying the signal. The Covenant record update, the formal legal reclassification, the 12 coordinate sets entering the public registry where every member species could read them. On the old format frequency, Lena's voice came through. It broadcast. We all saw it broadcast. Yara said, I know. The others are asking, Lena said, about the coordinates. Send them the second set, Yara said. The one I marked as primary habitation candidate. It is the best of the 12. Good atmosphere, liquid water, mid-sized landmass. It will need work. We are good at work, Lena said. Yes, Yara said, we are. She opened the ship's log. Entry 2221. She keyed in the date, the location, the outcome. One line, the way she logged everything. She sat for a moment after that. The Okonkwo made its small sounds around her. The drive cooling, the recycler cycling, the condensate collector dripping into the mug if she held it under long enough. She looked at the Lagos skyline, faded to almost nothing now, a ghost of a city on a cracked piece of ceramic. She had no name for what she felt. She was not going to go looking for one. The Keth had called it a stabilizing event. They had built a holiday around it. They had written cheerful songs and unveiled monuments, and spent 30 years assuming that the last human would do the sensible thing and vanish quietly into a history that belonged to them. She had spent 31 years in the dark, building the answer to that assumption. They got to find out what happens when you underestimate a species that does not know how to stop. She finished her fake coffee. She opened a course for the first set of coordinates. She went home,